Our moderator this evening is Dr. Beal from Virginia Tech University, and Bill's one of the foremost authorities in the world on reproduction. He's a teacher first and foremost, and as you saw in Bill Bowman's slides, he's one of the beef top 50.
Thanks, Mark. What we decided to do is Bill's done a really good job of introducing the topic because he gave you a baseline of information on the 50K, but he also introduced GeneMax, which a lot of these guys have been involved with. And so he's kind of set the stage for you scientifically. Their job now, Joe, is to kind of talk about how they've utilized that technology in each of their different situations. And so we asked them to just take a short time and talk about that. We'll go through, and each of them will do that. And then we thought we'd just open it up and ask questions, because many of you may be thinking about using this kind of technology. These are the guys to ask when you have questions about that. So, Joe, why don't we start out with you?
Okay, thank you, and thanks for the good dinner. And we're a purely commercial Angus-based, really Angus-based, about purebred almost, but we're an Angus-based cow-calf operation. And we experienced a horrible drought in the Oklahoma Panhandle and had to sell a whole bunch of cows and got our cow herd down pretty darn small. And so then we were faced with, how do we rebuild? Because no more cows than we had. Just keeping our heifer calves was going to be a really slow process in terms of rebuilding the herd. And so we went out and bought on Superior Livestock 5 different ranches, heifers, calves, and we picked the best we could pick in terms of reading the write-up in the catalog. And the reason we had to do all this is because there's just not enough good Gardiner Angus sired cattle out there in the marketplace for you to buy. So anyway, out of the 5 different bunches, and I'll just tell you, 2 of those bunches went back to Gardiner, and the other 3 bunches didn't, but they went back to well-known breeders, and I'm not going to tell you who, scattered all around the country. And we was kind of like a guy in a cave, because all we knew about these cattle really was the write-up in that catalog and kind of a vague idea about the genetics behind them. So we were looking for anything to help us decide which of those cattle we wanted to keep in our herd and multiply, and which ones we wanted to feed or do something else with. So out of that roughly 500 heifers, we GeneMax tested 10% of each bunch. Well, 2 of those groups, and we'd set the bar at an 80 score on GeneMax. And maybe that's too high or too low, I don't know, but that's just where we set it. Well, 2 of those bunches of cattle, and they happened to be the cattle that went back to Gardiner at some point, 2 of those bunches, about 60% of them, was GeneMax testing up there in that 80% or 80 score. And the other 3 bunches, about 20% of them tested up there, and the rest of them, the majority of them, tested below that and quite a bit. So of the 2 bunches that GeneMax scored pretty good, we tested all those cattle. And at the end of the day, we ended up keeping 107, I think, of those 500 heifers to go back into our herd. The average GeneMax score was 92 on them, and the cost was about $30 a head for the GeneMax heifers that tested 80 or above. Now, those heifers are bred. They haven't calved yet. We don't really know if we did the right thing or how this is going to work out. But we had that flashlight in a dark cave, and that was GeneMax, and it didn't light up the whole cave, but it gave us a little bit of a way to see where we might be headed with this deal. So that's how we used it, Bill, and I'm not gonna say it's the only way to go, but that's just one example of how we tried to use it.
Good, thanks, Joe. Sam, you want to talk a little bit about how you've used it?
Well, Bill, our main experience with the GeneMax has been with some work we've been doing here with Larry Core, and primary daughter Marissa has been heading that project up with him. But we've got one herd out that has been out in Lyman, Colorado, that's been dedicated to sire evaluation, testing cattle for Gardiner Angus. So we've got a number of years of progeny in the Angus Association bank of data. So here a couple years ago, Larry and his team gathered snips off of these cows and got this GeneMax information, and now we can match that with the calves to see how it all correlates together. Now, as Larry came out last spring here and showed that to Marissa and I, it was real interesting to look at, because I guess I'll go back to this point a little bit in that, well, my wife Janet here can testify that I probably got 50 years of records in files and boxes, etc., that she wonders what I'd really do with all of it, and I probably don't use it like I should, okay? But we have used that over time, kind of like this pyramid effect here that Bill was talking about, and this is just another tool. But as I looked at this GeneMax information, these numbers that Larry showed Marissa and I, and yeah, it was real impressive as you start at the top, 99, 99, 99, 99. Well, I got down at the bottom, there's some 1 and 2s. Okay? Now, we go through a process of selection here through various informations and also some phenotype evaluation when we select heifers to be cows. And my son-in-law calls it giving out roses, okay? You know, the bachelorette program or whatever you call that. But obviously I gave out some roses I shouldn't have gave out, you know? And so it's kind of embarrassing. But if I did look at that, the positive part is the younger ones out of that herd were mostly at the upper end. The older ones were at the bottom. So at least told me my genetic source I was working with was doing a good job. Okay? But maybe in the alley and on the scales, I'd missed a few things. You know, we kind of give these females as they come through, do you want to be a cow and be on the annual payroll? Or do you want to be a member of the Golden Arch Hall of Fame? And obviously, again, some of them slipped by me. They were counterfeits. You know, so that's where I see a test there. And Marissa and I have talked about this for years of how we could use something like this to you know, back at the house, evaluate, okay, which ones are we going to select from? And I still am a big believer in making visual appraisal on phenotype. But main thing you're really doing there is for soundness. You know, are they sound, structurally sound, to be in that part of your operation? But I see this as the tool to help close out some of those gaps. You know, like Bill said, we got weaning data, birth data, genetics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we can have all these full sibs, and they'll hit the bell curve like he showed you. But there's going to be a few of them that are 99s that exceed it. But I'd sure like to get rid of these ones that are down here in the lower percentile. Because as we went through this herd, you know, 60, 70% of them, I was happy we had them. But there's a good 10%, I'm embarrassed to say, that they snuck by me. As in our operation, it stems from irrigated farming through cow-calf, and I've been involved with the cow-calf for over 50 years with my dad. But we've been in the feeding business there at home. Well, even though we've retained ownership for over 40 years on our cow-calf, we've been in the feeding business there at home for a little over 20. Now, we've been kind of fortunate and blessed in that the cattle we primarily feed are other cow-calf producers like you all that are clients of, say, like the Gardiners here or other seed stock producers, particularly seed stock producers that are members of the U.S. Premium Beef Seed Stock Supply. And so we have a unique set of cattle we get to feed for. We don't have the run-of-the-mill 5-way cross. Joe, you're on the cord. Yeah?
No, I'm usually on your cord.
I usually get my chain jerked a lot, but I haven't done it. But we do have a unique situation we get to feed for. And what makes it fun for me is we gather a lot of information, both individually on the feedlot as well as on the carcass form, and feed that back to them. And it's interesting to watch these producers that are paying attention to the numbers and how they continue to make improvement. Now, we were talking a little bit about, phenotype and all these different things. Now, I'm going to tell one here on Joe and his dad. But all this information is great here as far as getting the best cattle, because we never want to forget the most important things is pounds. Pounds pays the bills. That's been kind of my saying, is pounds pays the bills. But if you want to get more for those pounds, they need to be high quality. And so this GeneMax falls right into that category. Well, we've had the pleasure to feed Joe's cattle a number of times. We have an event that takes place up at Garden City known as Beef Empire Days, and some of you are probably familiar with it. Well, one year, not too long back, we were selecting some out to go to the show. And I usually have the guys in the feedlot say, well, you'll pick some out and we'll kind of finalize the numbers. And they went through and I said, well, we got to find a heifer. Well, we didn't find any. So I went back and looked in Joe's pen. And I said, well, why didn't you get this heifer? They said, did you look at the head on that heifer? Well, I said, we don't eat the head. This show isn't about the head. Well, to make a long story short, we took it into the show, got in the live part of the contest, and the live judge says, I really like this heifer, and I'm going to use her up at the top end. She is the ugliest headed heifer I've ever seen. Well, lo and behold, she won the whole show. She was the Beef Empire Days Brookover champion heifer, Brookover champion animal. And when I related it back to Joe, he says, yeah, I remember that heifer. Dad and I didn't keep her either because she was the ugly headed So sometimes we can get caught up on some little items out there we think are important, but have nothing to do with dollars and cents. But it's been our pleasure to work with some of the founding part of this GeneMax and watch it grow. And I know Marissa and I look forward to what it can do for us here in the future.
Thanks, Sam. Thank you very much. Good story. Well, Randall, I know you've been involved with this both yourself and with your clients, so share with us what your experiences have been.
Where do I start? Several years ago, there was an opportunity to what we consider to buy some heifers, to breed them, and then resell them. Our goal was to add value to them and then sell a known quantity of genetics that's going to perform like we want it to do. Well, as a veterinarian, we're all about risk management. So the first thing that was important for us, and I'm sure I sound like a broken record, is from a health standpoint, they have to be BVD free. So it's actually one way that we've built relationships with people. We've bought some heifers. They had some PI calves on them. We went back and told them about it, and they corrected the problem and then allowed us to help them on down the road. But we could go to the sale barn. In fact, Mark has had clients in the past that have bought bulls to put on black heifers, and they've gone to sale barn and they bought those, as I call it, the sure enough reputation kind of cattle with a lot of bone under it. And you've heard everyone describe that. Well, we don't know how they're going to perform. So our next goal was to go to Mark and say, Mark, do you have some people that might want to sell their heifers? We'd like to buy them. So we started doing that, and we've bought about 3 ranches cattle for about 7 or 8 years. And so over a period of time, we decided, okay, we're going to see what kind of GeneMax score they really are. The group of cattle that we're going to sell this year has an average GeneMax score of 75. Now, there's cattle that are better, but at least we can tell people this is what they are. It's like Joe said as he was buying cattle on the video. You can read in there, these cattle have been sired by these kind of bulls, and we've used this program for this period of time. Well, I don't think today that's good enough, because we want to give our producers or people that buy from us a known quantity, not only from a health standpoint, but a genetic standpoint. And I'll give you, for instance, why that's important. Recently, we saw a client feed out their heifers that were not pregnant. And they garnered a $181 premium. That was because they were 40% prime, 100% choice, and they yielded 65%. Well, we can do that time after time after time. If we sell a product that's going to have a high GeneMax score, we breed him to a bull that calves a low birth weight that's going to grow rapidly, and then, as Henry Gardner would say, we'd like their meat to be a pound of gold, not a pound of lead, so we can give a predictable response. So I think it's easy. And anymore, I'm not sure I'm a veterinarian. I'm a production management. And what we try to do is help encourage people and say, we can do this, and you can do this too, and incorporate this into your management practices. And I've talked to a number of you people in the room that have decided to take their heifers this year and say they've ordered some cards and they're going to GeneMax them and make their first scoring or for their first cut on those cattle that are going to score high, whatever the threshold they want. So great tool, and we're excited to be a part of it.
Thanks, Randall. Appreciate that. Let's just open it up for questions. You've heard the experiences these guys have had, and it's pretty varied. What do you have as questions for them? The question was, what's the biggest surprise based on the data?
We, just one example, but we kept those 107 of the 80 and above and put them in the herd. But then, because I'm not a very trusting person, I went ahead and fed some of the ones that GeneMax scored not that good. In other words, 80 or below. And it was truly amazing. Those cattle actually fed pretty good. And so the way I view GeneMax is, I think Bill said 120 SNPs. That's not as good as a DNA test. It's not as good as a bucket full of kill data like Sam has, in which he's provided me a lot of that too, and thank you for that. But it's a tool. It's a starting point. It's a tool in the toolbox. It's the flashlight in the cave.
When you talked about that flashlight in the cave, Joe, that was where you were after the drought. But now you are where you are today. How do you see GeneMax playing in what you're going to do in the future?
Okay, we're going to use GeneMax quite a lot because we do a lot of AI everything and then turn out multiple sires in a pasture. And we're always trying to prove up our bulls or cull the sorry end off or decide, hey, this bull really has thrown some great calves here, and we may want to go collect him and use him a little bit AI or something. And so we use the part of GeneMax that identifies those parentage, because we may have 5 or 6 bulls in a pasture, and you get the kill data, and then you can say, oh, wow, this bull hit a home run, and this bull, he's going to go to the Golden Arches Award or whatever. So we're using that.
I got you. Sam, you've retained cattle for a long time, and you used it specifically to go backwards a little bit and look at where you are. How do you look at it as far as going forwards, either in your satellite herds where you're selecting heifers, or what about in the feedlot? Is there any application there for it?
Well, I would hope, Bill, that we'll probably use a lot of the same criteria in selecting our heifers, but we'll add that to it. We'll might say an initial sort, and then we would use that we'll just keep zeroing it down. But hopefully we can miss and avoid those ones I was talking about that showed up as we did do this, but hopefully we can avoid those showing up in the herd. Now, I got to see one of Gardner's customers here, and a client of ours as well, and this gentleman has never had an ID program. I've sent him data at times to show him how much variance there was in his cattle, but he was just showing me the other day where he had ran a GeneMax test on his heifers, and he says, wow, this is pretty impressive. And I said, well, but these are the ones you got to get rid of. And he realizes that now, and he realizes what he's been missing by not having an ID program and that in his operation. But at the same time, he can quickly catch up. He can very quickly catch up, in my estimate, by using this GeneMax program. It's kind of like the way I looked at ultrasound years ago when it first came available. If you didn't know anything about your cattle, or if I was kind of like Joe here and went out and had 1,000 heifers out of Montana, let's say, but I wanted to make some cows out of them, that was a means to probably help me get the upper end, other than just yay and nay and give out roses, you know. But I think GeneMax is just a little more classified scale to do that. Now, as far as at the feed yard, I know I had a packer years ago ask me if I could know chute side, which ones would grade and do this and that, what would it be worth to me? Well, we never did come up to an answer to that question. The thing that still is trouble for me, though, is I'm blessed with better than average cattle to feed for. If I was like the everyday feed yard, because I just got 2 small little feed yards, and when it's basically filled up with cattle like you all produce out there, it would be a tough challenge. I mean, I'm just thankful I got them to feed, okay? You know, particularly in these times that we're in, but, you know, I'm not having to deal with all kinds of combinations and high-risk cattle and all this, but I think in those kind of scenarios it could be, if you had different markets you're shooting for, but on the other hand, all ours are going on the rail, you know, so we don't necessarily fit that same scenario that you're referring to there,
Right.
Bill, but I think the potential is there for yards that have multi-classes of cattle, how you might sort them up and market them in different ways.
Questions out there. Have any of you all tried this, and do you have questions based on that experience? Question was the correlation between GeneSeek and GeneMax.
GeneSeek, I don't know what product. Well, they're a commercial product. Yeah. We don't have any experience with that. It's not an Angus-specific test to start with. I mean, GeneMax would have been developed and on an Angus-specific population, and so I think that's one of the things. One of the things, the technology, I think early on there was a hope that we were going to find a silver bullet that we could go out in the middle of a 100,000 head feedlot and use a DNA test to characterize cattle of all the mixes and matches that might exist in that. It's not that easy. I mean, as we've learned more, panels are very breed specific, and so I think science has evolved to realize that today. There's still efforts trying to find a general approach that would work across all breeds, but the impact of those SNPs is very specific within a breed, within a population. That's why it's so vital that as we build these numbers, you retrain those to again, cover that population, do a better job of covering that population. And so I think that's the important line to draw there is that product is really kind of non-breed specific the way it was developed, that Identity General commercial test, whereas GeneMax was developed on the Angus specific population with Zoetis.
The question is, what's the total number of GeneMax tests they've done so far? Do you know, Larry?
I think the last time we were talking about Bill, when we were together, I was thinking 16,000.
Yeah, I was going to say close to 20.
16 is that somewhere, that even was maybe a month or two back. We got a lot of this fall. A question I have, Bill, if I can.
Go for it.
The panel members. One of the exciting things I think about DNA technology is that we're going to be able to identify traits in the future that are economically very important that we don't have EPDs for. I'd be curious with panel members if they could pick one trait or two, what those would be that they'd love to have more genetic information on.
Randall, you can start this one off.
You know, if we could all have a GeneMax or a score for health, and they'd all be 100, and that means they all live. It doesn't matter what kind of your vet you have, and that way you couldn't blame it all on me. I'd love that. I think that there's some of those kind of things in the works, because we know that there's some interactions with genetics and with the environment and with nutrition that influence health. Is there a portion of that that's heritable? We don't know that. I would say years ago that if I went into a feed yard and I saw a big old Simmental calf that was green, that he has never been exposed to anything, he was going to die. So I was making a genetic selection on my part. Now, that's not a fair statement, but that was a stereotype that I had in my mind. So I think that there's probably some things that we're going to learn about health that are interesting.
Sam, what are your thoughts?
Well, being in the feedlot part, I'd sure agree on the health part. I know Larry and I've talked about this, and I don't know whether they'd ever come in something in the area of DNA, but again, the main thing I really look like when I go out to look at cattle is structural soundness. And I don't know whether that ever come through there or not, but structural soundness or udder quality and these kind of things. One thing while I'm on the floor I might just bring out here, I mentioned earlier about pounds pay the bills, okay? But if you want to get more for those pounds, then you need quality. You know, we've been, a large part of the country's been in a drought, and we keep hearing about how we got the smallest number of cows ever. We've got overkill capacity. We've got overfeed capacity. But not much has ever been said about how much beef we're producing. We're essentially producing the same beef. You know, the commercial cattle feeding started out here in the Great Plains about 60 years ago. 1,000-pound steer was a pretty big boy. Most of our steers that went out this year were 1,400 pounds. We're getting more done with ever beating heart. And a lot of that's to better health programs. A lot of it's genetics, better nutrition programs. Now, the positive out of the droughts may be is as we all go back restocking these pastures, maybe we take a little better look at how many cows ought to be out there. Because that 1,400-pound steer, mama weighs 1,400 pounds. Okay? That's something to remember and think about. But we're doing so much more for ever beating heart. Now, that beating heart also applies to the labor force, because we all know that's a challenge too. And we're doing more for ever beating heart of labor out there as well. But we're just doing so much more with science and that I think it's amazing.
Thanks, Sam. Joe, any thoughts about what you'd like to see in the future?
Oh, I mean, we can all dream. I'd like to look at a GeneMax test, and it would tell me, or an EPD that would tell me how efficient this cow is going to be for her life. And that's going to be a real tough one to come up with. But you know, we all have in our mind this image of, well, gee, if this cow, or if this progeny of this cow is a really fast gainer and all this, well, she's going to cost you more to keep and maintain. I don't think it's true. Matter of fact, I know it's not true. There's cows out there that do it all, and they do it efficiently. And we need a tool to help us identify which ones those are.
Thanks. I'd be remiss if I stood up here and didn't say reproduction needs to be the number one thing, being a reproductive physiologist, and I'm sorry. When you look at profit in the cow-calf industry, the number one factor is reproductive efficiency. And so what I'd really like to see in the future, Larry, is we know that reproduction is controlled to some extent by genetics, albeit it's a lowly heritable trait. Man, I'd love to have some measure that we could use in selection for improved reproduction. That's our list of wishes.
Already thought you had it all fixed.
Yeah, right. That's our list of wishes, Bill. Can you speak to traits like reproduction, efficiency, and health in particular? Is where we are and where do you think we're going? Because those aren't highly heritable traits like some of the ones you've worked with.
No, and it's a great wish list for sure. Reproduction-wise, and again, Bill's kind of followed and worked with Sally quite a bit as we've rolled out a heifer pregnancy EPD. And again, it's a lowly heritable trait, but there is variation there. And so we're starting to identify that. It takes that phenotypic data, though, that we don't have 8 million heifer breeding records to go into an EPD run. We've got about 37,000 now. So we need people to help us aggressively collect more of that data. We've looked a lot at longevity, productive life, whatever you want to call it. That incorporates some of the things Sam's talking about in terms of soundness, getting cows that function and live a long life, productive life with a regular and consistent reproduction cycle in an operation. That, again, from a seed stock standpoint, very difficult data to collect and information to gather, but it's on our radar screen. It's something we're working on very, very diligently. In terms of the efficiency standpoint, I think across the industry, a lot of the efficiency work that's been done so far has been kind of on the post-weaning, I'm going to say the feedlot phase, and we're starting to get selection tools that are going to start identifying some efficiency there. The cow piece, the forage piece, it's a difficult nut to crack, but we've got research efforts with the association sponsored through the Angus Foundation right now, a 5-year project working with University of Illinois and North Carolina State on a 5-year project that's really just targeting efficiency on the cow side, the cow forage side. And so it's something that we're definitely going to work with. And I know in terms of Randall's comments, the industry has really put a lot of effort and a lot of dollars into looking at different diseases and interaction there. There's a multi-university grant. It's I think about a $5 million USDA grant that's looking at BRD, for example, and reproduction associated with another set of researchers right now. And so there's a lot of efforts out there, but again, as we develop genomic tools to apply to some of these problems, the important phenotypic data is still very crucial to be able to train those panels with.
Thanks, Bill.
Yeah, we kind of talk about, Brian, they being kind of 75% Angus influence, and so that's kind of been our target. I mean, we've had some producers that have used the test on some 50+% heifers and still get some variation in those results. But again, when we talk about it being an Angus-specific panel, I guess our ideal scenario, Larry, is if we can have 75% Angus influence in those heifers to use that product on.
I would say not at this point, no. I think more from the commercial cow-calf standpoint, it's being looked at for, again, the heifers, but on a feeder cattle standpoint, I'm not aware of it just yet. I think the door could open up there. There's some other, I think there's some new ideas being thought about how do we market these feeder cattle. I mean, you know, we've gone from just the everyday buying on the ranch or buying in the sale barn to like Superior, but there's some other new methods being developed out there or talked about, and this could fit in real well. The more information we have, the more value they bring to the marketplace. I guess still as a cattle feeder, you know, we buy, we feed for, etc. But the cattle that have it all, and I realize we're in a very good market right now. I mean, for the person that's out there as a cow-calf operator, you know, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, so to speak, and to pass up today's calf and feeder markets is tough to do. But to get the full value, you probably really got to take them all the way. But these are some pretty challenging and risky times, as last year particularly was, when you had $7 corn. But I think in a 10-year span of time, the kind of cattle we're talking about, you need to really own them all the way if you're going to get everything out of them.
Larry, I know certified Angus beef has got to be hoping that GeneMax gets used as a marketing tool. Has anybody adopted it yet that you've seen in a widespread way for marketing heifers, for example? Or is that something that you think we'll see in the future?
Well, I think there's a number of ways that I'll compliment the gardeners, as they've always done in classic exams. You look at the back of the catalog, and they're actually utilizing it to kind of categorize heifers in terms of market potential. We also have got some operations. One of the feedlots in Colorado selected out a large number of heifers, and then GeneMax, I mean, just like Joe was talking about, got down to a saleable group that they're actually going to put on the market. So I think we're starting to see quite a bit of that. And then I think, with reference to your question on if we tested the heifers, what we'd really like to see is that logically that should relate to the steer portion of the population. In other words, we test the heifers for our replacement
Sam, if somebody did that and brought you a set of cows that had been GeneMaxed and you knew the results weren't really that great, are you going to treat them differently when they come into the feed yard?
Well, you really put me on the spot here. But you're saying they're not that great.
They're right. I mean, they did what Larry said. They measured all the heifers, and they gave you the data, and that data wasn't real shiny.
As the GeneMax was it?
In the GeneMax. Let's say their total scores were more in the 30s and 40s instead of up there in the 90s like Joe was talking about.
Then I want to buy them at a discount.
Yeah, what are you going to... But how are you going to manage them? Let's say they're going to retain them, and you're going to be a part owner. How are you going to manage them?
Probably just push them that much harder, you know. I mean, we're not going to do that much different in our deal. I mean, particularly coming through GeneMax, which is Angus, they still going to have potential to grade better than, say, maybe the Continental cattle or whatever. But we're not going to hold anything back from the pharmaceutical standpoint. We're going to implant them up, and we're going to try to get all the performance we can out of them.
Coming out the other end, you market them different?
We aren't currently, no. You know, but now, once we have cattle and we know, you know, this is before GeneMax, but if we have cattle we've happened to have the opportunity to own and they just fell on their face, well, we don't buy them again. We only have to learn once.
Sam, along those lines, let's just say they had an average GeneMax score of 1, the whole group. Would you market those with a different grid if you knew they didn't have the propensity to marble, even though they were black?
It might be the wise thing to do, yes. However, I think you know, we won't get into details, but, you know, we've got some that we both are familiar with that said they wouldn't grade, and they did 75%. So
I'd like to make a comment along those lines. You remember the pie chart that Bill had up here, and GeneMax, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was approximately 40% of the influence of marbling. And this is something that we talk about every day. Now, you could make GeneMax look really bad if your cattle all score, let's say, 80. But if they're wild and they run, and if they stand back there at the back of the pen, if we don't take care of those mamas when they're bred, and we short them on nutrition, there's some really good work out in Nebraska on fetal programming. If we starve those cattle down, and we've seen some of that, probably due to the drought, and if we have poor nutrition, if we have BBD running through the cow herd, we could make those cattle that scored really well from a GeneMax standpoint look really bad. They're not going to gain. The cost of production in the feed yard is not going to be good, and we know that they're probably not going to marble and express their genetic potential. So just keep in mind, we can have the best genetically superior cattle, but make them do poorly. On the other hand, we can have cattle that maybe their bell-shaped curve is in the middle. Maybe it's 75, maybe it's 60. But if we make every day a good day in the life of a calf, and we can help them, and we can have Sam, we can inject those into Sam and say, Sam, you want to buy some of those? At least once we can do it. But with Sam's care, I think they can be profitable cattle. So just because we have cattle that they don't GeneMax clear up here at 95%, all of them, we have valuable cattle that if your cattle score at 75 or 60, yeah, they need improvement, and we can put genetics in that can improve them. But if you've managed them well, and every day's been a good day in that life of that calf, there still can be very profitable cattle.
Thanks, Randall. Mark always says marbling's a lifetime experience, is I think you're saying. And Brian, I think you'd second that emotion. But, Joe, I'd rather start out with those 90s than with those ones. Wouldn't you?
And I will say this. If you send your dog to Sam, he'll say enough cord to make that sucker
Any other, Jimmy?
Have you guys had GeneMax to do the sire side of it, to start researching who sires the best calves, are y'all, what do you see on the sire side of it? It's like all the bulls that you got out there, are they all getting 20 or 30 times covered, or are you seeing big differences? Some guys are loafing and some guys are stars?
Absolutely. Yeah, well, you'll have one bull breed 40 head and one bull breed 3. And that's another one to do a EPD on. I mean, most of the time, yeah, they all get their 25 or 30 or whatever. But you'll have super achievers and you'll have lazy bums.
I'd say that breeding's a lifetime experience thing too, Jimmy.
The problem, Uncle Larry, was when we did the research, it was lower heritage traits than we thought, and it's very, very hard data phenotypes together.
Yeah, and I'd argue that, Jimmy, he probably did find differences, but a lot of that's due to social dominance effects and some other behavioral things that aren't necessarily reproduction per se in terms of their genetics. It's a lot of things go into that, just like Randall talked about, for marble. It looks like we got the burning ones out. Mark, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Well, let's give our panelists and moderator a round of applause. I'm prejudiced, but I like to claim confidence that I'm right. This has been one of the best programs that we've ever had, and it's been exciting for us to have such a great audience join us, and we thank you so much for taking your Sunday evening to be with us, and I know I learned a lot, and I hope you did too.